It was a stormy night, Mr. Whitaker began. The kind of night where the wind howls like a lost soul and the rain lashes against the windows as if trying to claw its way inside. I was about your age, spending the summer at my grandparents' old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. No streetlight, no neighbors for miles, just miles of dark woods and field. That night, the power had gone out, plunging the house into darkness. My grandparents lit candles and told me not to worry. Storms like this pass quickly, Grandpa had said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a hint of unease. I decided to go to bed early, the flickering candlelight guiding me up the creaky stairs to my room. My window overlooked the vast expanse of the backyard, which faded into the dense woods. Normally, the sight comforted me, a patch of nature so close, almost like a painting. But that night, something felt off. As I lay in bed, the storm grew worse. Thunder rumbled so loudly it shook the walls, and flashes of lightning turned the room into a strobe-lit nightmare. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it finally did, it was restless and uneasy. Then, something woke me. A sound, a faint tap-tap-tap against the glass of my window. At first, I thought it was just the rain, but then I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. My heart started pounding as I turned to look. That's when I saw it. A face, pressed against the window, pale and gaunt, its eyes wide and unblinking. The features were distorted, as if the face didn't quite fit its own skull. Its mouth was frozen in a grotesque grin, the kind that sends chills down your spine because it's all wrong. I froze, too terrified to scream, to move, to even breathe. The face didn't move either. It just stared at me, those eyes boring into mine as if trying to reach into my very soul. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed. It could have been seconds, or it could have been hours. Then it was gone, just like that. One blink, and the window was empty. I convinced myself it was my imagination, a trick of the storm and my tired mind. But deep down, I knew better. "What did you do?" a boy interrupted, his voice trembling. Mr. Whitaker smirked, his eyes glinting with the firelight. What could I do? I was just a kid, scared out of my wits, but that wasn't the end of it. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world fresh and bright. The fear of the night seemed almost silly in the daylight, and I tried to forget about the face. But when I went outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Under my window, in the muddy ground, were footprints, bare human footprints, leading from the woods to the house. But here's the thing. There were no footprints leading back. I told my grandparents, but they brushed it off. Probably just some drifter passing through, Grandpa said, though his face was pale. That night, I barricaded my window with furniture, determined not to see that face again. And for a while, it worked, until the whispers started. Late at night, when the house was silent and everyone else was asleep, I'd hear them, faint, almost too soft to catch, like a breeze carrying words just out of reach. They came from outside, from the woods, and always, they seemed to be calling my name. By now, the children were leaning forward, hanging on to every word. One girl clutched a blanket tightly, her knuckles white. "Did you ever find out what it was?" she whispered. Mr. Whitaker shook his head slowly. "Not exactly, but one night, I came close, too close. It was my last week at the farmhouse. I couldn't wait to leave, get away from the whispers and the shadows that seemed to move when no one was looking. But the thing about fear is, it doesn't let go of you that easily. That night, the whispers were louder, more insistent. I couldn't ignore them anymore. I don't know what possessed me, but I decided to look. I crept to the window, moved the furniture aside, and peered into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. But then, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and there it was, the face. But this time, it wasn't at the window. It was in the yard, standing in the shadows, its body barely visible. And it wasn't alone. Dozens of faces stared back at me, identical in their unnatural horror, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They didn't move, didn't blink, they just watched. I stumbled back, screaming, and that's the last thing I remember before I woke up in the morning. My grandparents hovering over me, their faces lined with worry. And that, Mr. Whitaker concluded, his voice heavy with finality, is why I never went back to that farmhouse. Some things are better left behind, forgotten, but sometimes they don't let you go. The children stared at him, their faces pale, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Finally, one boy dared to ask, "Do you think it could, follow someone?" Mr. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, his eyes shadowed. "Who's to say it hasn't?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After all, you're sitting right by the window." A gust of wind rattled the cabin, and every child turned, half expecting to see a face staring back at them. But there was nothing, at least not this time.